Now, when it comes to General McCaffrey, I like what the general had to say. I want you to listen to this because he is making a lot of sense. A lot of people want to go ahead. Let's open Bagram again because we need to fight. There's something happened. They bombed us, etc. Not looking at reality. Listen to General McCaffrey.
What do you make of the criticism that this likely would not have happened if the Bagram Air Force Base was still open, that was a far more fortified environment with, what I believe was multiple runways? Is that a fair criticism?
Look, the Biden administration chose to pull all 3,500 troops at the time out of Afghanistan, triggering a cascade of events. That's behind us. I've heard several of the cognoscenti on TV talking, to include Congressman Kinzinger, talking about recapturing Bagram. That would be the biggest airborne operation since World War II. It's not even remotely going to happen. It's off the table. Right now, we got one brigade on one runway on the edge of Kabul. I've heard a lot of people talking about nightmare scenarios. If we stay against the will of the Taliban, on Wednesday morning, the nightmare scenario is light machine gun fire and a dozen mortar rounds closing down the air evacuation of our forces, at which point we got a real problem. So I think we need to ignore a lot. The poor president's got to ignore these voices, continue the extraction of the U.S. military on the ground, and then look at the consequences and deal with the next step, to include millions who will cross the frontiers into Iran, Pakistan, Tajikistan, and elsewhere. And we probably owe them a serious humanitarian effort in those countries.
As we learn more about who was responsible or what group was responsible for today's attack, General, does the U.S. retaliate? What does that look like?
There have been a lot of discussions about Taliban 2.0, which makes me sort of laugh every time I hear about it. These are some of the most brutal, chaotic factions imaginable. Haqqani himself is a criminal more than he is a jihadist. There's very loose control over the Taliban elements that are out there, never mind the few hundred operatives of ISIS-K. We don't have good targets. We're not going to use air power in downtown Kabul or Tomahawk missiles. So basically, again, keep your eye on the challenge here. The challenge is complete the extraction of U.S. forces and then deal with the consequences in a sensible way.
And that is a sensible man. And that is what we should follow. And there's one other thing that he had to say on another segment, and that I want you to see, because a lot of folks think, oh, we can somehow go back in. We can somehow make things better in Afghanistan. He has the final word.
If you were in the Oval right now advising the president, what would be the advice that you would give, given the deaths of 12 service members, given the intel that says there are continuing threats of suicide bombers or vehicles being used in that way? What's the advice you would offer the president now in terms of how we move forward today and potentially in the days ahead?
Well, one of the most important things General McKenzie said was those troops are there to defend the evacuation in the airfield, not themselves. These are some hard soldiers and Marines. There's a lot of them on the ground. So I don't think that will be a factor going forward, certainly not in the chain of command. The problem is, right now, what is the likelihood of the continued evacuation getting Americans, many as 1,500, mostly all over Afghanistan, and their families to the airport and out? Pretty minimal. So it's time now to focus on a professional, logical extraction of the forces. And the president shouldn't listen to the voices telling him to ignore all this, stay on for an indeterminate period of time, re-enter with more forces. That's nonsense. This war is over.
That is the point. This war should have been over 20 years ago when it started. This war is over. Thank you, Brother Biden, for finishing this stuff off and getting the hell out of there. And let's use this as an example. as a second Vietnam that needn't had been. Let's remember that. We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number one, subscribe to our channel. And number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.